are you? Thank you, Rabbi Kogod. I'm very delighted. I've never been on a virtual trip to Israel, so I'm just hanging out with you, and yeah, you never know where we're going to get to. So welcome to Jerusalem, to my city. I was born here in Jerusalem, and my children were born here, and my two little grandchildren were born here this year. So, like, I'm enjoying an incredible feeling of being in Jerusalem, and I also want to say that I have an incredible love for the city because my Abba and Ima, my father and mother, came in the 40s to Palestine to be part of the, building the new Jewish state, and they came from Buffalo and San Francisco. And they chose to live in Jerusalem. It was like a choice of love, which they really held and cultivated till the last days of their lives. And I think they kind of dripped it into our milk somehow. So I haven't left. I've traveled the world, and I love traveling, but I've always lived in Jerusalem. And it's a very complicated city. And if you're visiting it in any way or form, dimension, real or virtual, I think the most important thing is to understand just how complex everything is, and how many different ethnic groups and how many different political tensions are kind of running through everything. And I thought, since I love myth, and I teach mysticism and Jewish myth, I chose to study with you some texts about the centrality of Jerusalem. Okay, the centrality of Jerusalem, because you might come from all kinds of places in the United States. Jerusalem has this long history of a huge desire poured into this place, which is seen as the center of everything in a certain way. And I thought we would start by reading. I mean, I'm going to share it on the screen if any of you don't have it. But I want to start with a pretty ancient kind of description. And maybe I'll just first read it. Okay, it comes from Midrash Tanchuma. It's, 5th century, 6th century CE. But I just want you to listen to the rhythm, like just get into the rhythm of the words that I'll be reading in English. And here they are. Second. Okay. I just want to know if you can see. Can you see everything? Oh, I got it. Just a second. I think I've got the wrong text here. Just a second. Sorry. Okay, here we are. So I want to read this. I hope you see this. This is the text that we're reading. As the navel is set in the center of the human body, so is the land of Israel at the navel of the world, situated in the center of the world. And Jerusalem in the center of the land of Israel, and the sanctuary in the center of Jerusalem, and the holy place in the center of the sanctuary, and the ark in the center of the holy place, and the foundation stone before the ark, because from it the world was founded. So let me just first be with this this concentric image, okay? And what I want to say about it is You know, even though we're not going to make this interactive at the moment, if you could think for a second, if you're given this as a tradition, what kind of emotion does it create towards this place called Jerusalem, right? And that's exactly the place which I want to start from, okay? So when I read this midrash for the first time, I just saw the circles, like the circles I brought here in the image. I just thought, oh my God, this is really just getting you in. It's kind of enticing you on the one hand, and it's creating this intensity around what it means to experience center of everything, center of everything. So that's one thing that I thought is very powerful, that it just takes you into the center of the circle. And the question is, what kind of emotion does it create? Does it create the desire to say, I want to be there? I want to be, I want it to belong to me. This is where this is the place that I must be in and I must have authority over. That's one thing that it might create. It might create for some other people exactly the opposite, like, back off everybody. This is too intense. It's too shimmering and it's too intense and it's too hoary and mythical. And I'd rather go live in Tel Aviv or something, or LA, okay, for that matter. That's another thing. Another thing that's very interesting is that the Midrash starts with the words, as the navel is set in the center of the human body, so is the land of Israel at the navel of the world. And it's an interesting choice, right? You would expect that they would say, it's the heart of the world, right? It's the heart of the world. It's the place where the heart opens up. And no, they choose, the navel. And when you think of it, like, what does that mean? Like, what is navel, right? Navel is the place that connects us to our past. It connects us to our mother. It connects us to the womb from where we came. It connects us backwards. And it's our lifeline, but it's not a lifeline, right? Our navel is not such an important, pierced or not, it's not such an important organ in our body once we're actually out in the world. Once we're out in the world, our umbilical cord is tied and it's kind of a place somewhere in the body. But the navel is where it's our anchor backwards. It's our lifeline from tradition. So I wanted to start with that image, this ancient image that just takes you in these concentric circles and brings you all the way to the center of the holy place. And by the way, you will notice that it adds another part of the image, which is that there's a foundation stone that lies in front of the ark. And the foundation stone is, according to this ancient tradition, the stone from which the world started, right? It ebbed and the stone was thrown into the abyss, and then slowly the world started kind of forming itself around that stone. So I'm bringing that as a starter or as an appetizer, because I think that when we come to the question of what I call this class, the attraction and the danger of touching the center, I want us to feel, and I want you as visitors to get a feel of how attractive and how dangerous that desire can be, to say, what is my relationship to this center point of the universe? Another thing that's very interesting is that these texts, this ancient text, was written not in a time that Israel was flourishing. Yeah, it was written after the destruction, after most of the population is not here, is clearly not in Judea. And actually that was the time in which the myth of the centrality of the land of Israel, and myth not from the point of view of a stupid story, myth from the point of view of a story that people carry that gives meaning to our life and orients us in our world. But actually, as Jews are leaving Israel, the language presenting Israel as center becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's a very fascinating thing in itself. So, so I want you to keep that when you're going to be traveling around Jerusalem today and tomorrow, have that in mind. And I chose to bring another story of center, which is a very, very fascinating story. And it appears in both Talmudim, in the Babylonian Talmud and in the Jerusalem Talmud, and in various other sources. And it's a crazy story, and it's a very, very important story in understanding ways of responsibly dealing with being in contact with the center, okay, which is Jerusalem. So in order to be able to read the story, we have to understand something about the characters that appear in it, okay? And the characters that appear in it are David. Yeah, David is the most important character. And then some other animated objects that are going to appear there. And Achitophel. So I just want to say something about David first. And I can share it here. But I want to say the story is about King David. And it's about King David and the temple. So before we enter the story, I want you to know that when we read the biblical text, we find out the following. We find out that David says to his son, David said to Solomon, my son, as for me, it was in my heart to build a house unto the name of the Lord my God. Okay? Ani haya im levavi livnot bait l'shem Adonai. But the word of the Lord came to me, saying, thou hast shed blood abundantly and hast made great wars. You shall not build a house unto my name, because you have shed much blood upon the earth in my sight. Behold, a son shall be born to you, who shall be a man of rest, ish menucha. Okay, he's not going to be a man of war. He is going to be ish menucha. And we say Shabbat menucha. It's like one of the blessings for Shabbat. A son is going to be born to you, and he's going to be called, and he's going to be a man of rest. And I will give him rest from all his enemies around about. For his name shall be Shlomo, right? And in the name Shlomo, you can hear the word shalom, right? Shalom meaning peace, meaning something whole. In this case, it's something also restful. And I will give peace and quietness unto Israel in his days. He, Shlomo, Solomon, shall build a house for my name, and he shall be to me for a son, and I will be to him as a father, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever. Okay? So I'm just stopping for a minute. It's a pretty interesting story, right? There's a person, David, very important character in our Tanakh, in the Bible. And David is a man filled with desire, doesn't really stop at no entry signs. And David wants to build a home and a house and a dwelling place for the Lord, right? He says, I will not give sleep to my eyes, if I do not build a house for my God in Jerusalem. And he wants and wants and wants, but God says, no, you're not. Actually, you're not going to be the person to build the house because your hands are filled with blood. Okay, then there's arguments all over the place. What kind of blood, and did he have to kill the people he killed? We're not going to get into that. What's very interesting is God says the answer is no. Okay. The other character that appears in our story is Achitophel. I just want to say something about him. I don't know if you've heard about him. Achitophel Agiloni, Achitophel from Gilo, which is in the southern part of Jerusalem. Achitophel was the counselor of King David. Yeah. And the word of Achitophel in his day was like the word of God. He was the wisest counselor. And he got into deep trouble with David because he crossed the lines in a time of a rebellion against David that was started by David's son Shalom. And there's a whole story that has to do with it. We're not going to get into that story, but I just want you to remember that when the word Achitophel comes into our story, it means somebody who's very wise, that his wisdom is not clearly for the good, okay? It's that type of character. So let us begin our journey with the story. I brought it from the two Talmudim, and I'm going to conflate the story because, like oral legends, they come in all kinds of forms like this. But let's look at this. When David came to dig the foundations of the temple, he dug 15,000 feet and had not reached the deep. Okay, I want to stop for a minute and say, like, okay, you open this and you start reading and you're saying, what exactly is David doing? I mean, didn't we just learn that he's not supposed to be doing this? What is he doing? It says here that he's digging the foundations of the temple. He dug 15,000 feet and did not reach the deep. The deep is the aquifer, right? The deep waters that lie under the rocks, right, in Jerusalem. And he did not reach the deep. Finally, he found a cluster of stones and was about to lift it when the rock spoke to him and said, "Do not touch me." Okay, and this is not out of Alice in Wonderland. This is out of our tradition. Okay, the rock speaks to David, opens its mouth, speaks to David and says, "Do not touch me." Why? Asked David. Because I am blocking the mouth of the deep, right? The deep is the abyss, is the Tehom. We'll talk about it or about her in a moment. But what we're meeting here is David digging down to create the foundations. And think of it for a moment, like, why is he doing that? You know, some answers have been given that for a person who's that passionate, even though he's told that he's not allowed to build the temple, then maybe he kind of deduces that to dig down the foundations he is allowed. But like, he can't keep away from this desire that he has to be part of the big project of building the temple for the God of Israel. But the question is, what happens when you reach a stone that starts talking to you? And not only does it start talking to you, but it's about a prohibition. It's saying to you, no, there is a limit. There is a boundary. You have to stop. Do not touch me. And when David tries to understand why, right, this rock says, I am here blocking the mouth of the deep, okay? And David asks, how long have you been here? And the rock said, from the time the merciful one sounded his voice in Sinai. The earth trembled and the water sank, and I was put here to block the deep. Even so, David did not listen. And once the rock was lifted, the deep arose and was about to submerge the world. So let me just stop for a moment. Okay, it's an amazing. I was still waiting for the animator to do the movie of this story. But I want to point out some things that are very interesting. When David asks this rock, "What are you doing there?" You know, you could have thought that the rock would say, "I'm here from the time of creation. I was put here to block the deep." So I want to say something about the deep. We just read last week, I mean, not this Shabbat, but the last one, we read the story of Genesis. And the story of Genesis opens with the fact that before the earth and the sky, before they were formed, there was tohu and vohu, there was void, there was emptiness, there was balagan, there was all kinds of chaos maybe. And there was darkness on the face of Tehom. Okay, Tehom. And Tehom is a word for the abyss, the cosmic abyss, but it's what was there before there was the created earth and oceans. And it's very interesting that the rock says, I wasn't put here during the time of creation. But when God revealed himself in Sinai to all the people of Israel of all times and actually gave them the law, right? Structure, order, how to do things, that was the moment of the taking over, of saying, this is what's going to be, this is the system that's going to be, and now I'm going to put this rock, was put there to block the ability of the cosmic waters of the abyss to come up too much into our world. And also, I want to say, think about this Tehom. When we look at the word Tehom, if we're Hebrew speakers, and we know the myths of the world that was around the time of the Bible, Tehom is also the name of Tiamat. And Tiamat is the great, great archaic goddess, right? That existed when everything was water and water. And she was this great mother, kind of ancient, archaic god, mother god. And that the story of Enuma Elish, you know, when we read the stories of the ancient Near East, the creation story is about killing Tiamat. Tiamat and the Tehom, the abyss, and Tiamat in many ways belong to the same imagination, right? And Marduk, who comes as the young god, he kind of kills Tiamat, and he slays her into two, and from the upper part, he creates the sky. From the lower part, he creates the earth. But that's a fascinating story of Tiamat, and kind of residual parts of this great, great ancient myth exist also in the Bible, right? Especially the stories that we have in the Bible of God subduing the power of the waters. And that's another part that I want to bring in, that there's those ancient stories lurking underneath. There's something that's underneath the stationary or simile of stationary world. There are waters underneath that are alive and ancient and powerful. So I want to bring that in also as when we're talking about the Tehom. And another thing that I want to bring about the Tehom is that the Tehom in much of our culture is the place of the subconscious. It's the great ocean of the subconscious, where great wisdom comes from, where great danger can also come from, where imagination comes from. It's something that is totally needed for our psyche, but it's underneath, okay? It's underneath the earth. It's underneath what seems to us to be solid. Way under that are the great waters of Tehom. So I'm bringing that so that when we're reading this, that the rock says, don't touch me. I am here to block the Tehom so that she stays in her place. We have to have kind of slowly get to learn that exciting world of the Tehom. And of course, as would be expected of David, David doesn't listen to her. He doesn't listen to the rock. And once he lifts the rock, right, this is the beginning of the end of the world. Or the Sorcerer's Apprentice, of course. It depends if you're doing the Disney version or the Babylonian Talmud version, but this is the Yerushalmi, the Palestinian Talmud version. But David knows how to pick up the stone and take it out of its place and go against the direct order of the rock. But now the waters are starting to come up. And the question is, what's going to happen? Then there's a story here. I actually don't want to get into it very, very much, but it says, Achitophel, I just told you about him. Achitophel came and stood there, and he said, now the king will drown, and I will become king. David said, who is wise, the wise one who knows the solution and does not give it? May he suffocate. He said what he said, and Achitophel gave the solution. David started singing the songs of ascent. And even so, Achitophel suffocated. That's the version that we have in our Talmud Yerushalmi. So we have that first very, very powerful part of the story. And I want for a moment to go to the second story, which tells this in a somewhat different version, but it's an important different version, so I want us to look at it. Okay, now you have to imagine yourself. Rav Chisda, it said to a certain scholar who was arranging his agadot, okay, legends or stories before him, and he said, have you heard why David composed his 15 songs of ascent? So I want to stop just for a moment and say, what are songs of the ascent? Okay, in the book of Tehillim, we have 15 psalms, which are called Shir HaMa'alot or Shir La Ma'alot. And they vary. There are certain things that are similar between them, but the question is, what does it mean, Shirei HaMa'alot? Why are they called that, and why were they composed? Okay, generally, by the way that the tradition or the interpretation is that the Ma'alot are the 15 steps that connected the area where all of Israel could be to the sanctuary, and that's where all the musicians stood and played their instruments as you came towards the temple, okay? So it's really where the big energy is. It's the place of the ascent to the sanctuary. That can be one of the meanings. But listen to the way it's told in the Babylonian Talmud. Said the other, so said Rav Yochanan. They're telling stories. When David dug the hollows beneath the site of the temple, the abyss arose and threatened to drown the world. And David thereupon uttered the 15 songs of ascent, causing the waves to subside. But if so, asked Rav Chisda, ought it not be the songs of descent instead of the songs of ascent? Rather, if you already remind me, I will say that it was stated thus. So I'm stopping again for a second, and I want to say, what is he telling here in this version? So first of all, if you'll be traveling and taking a tour to the Kotel or to that area in Jerusalem in this tour, and learning about it. What the story here is speaking about is the altar, okay? There was an altar that does not exist anymore, but an altar that stood in the place of the temple, and it had what are called hollows, okay, shitin. And the shitin were hollow kind of pipes carved into the stone that went all the way from the top of the temple down into the aquifer, down into the waters of the Shiloach, of the spring of the Shiloach that is down beneath the Temple Mount. And what is very interesting is that now, we celebrated Sukkot. During the time of Sukkot, water was brought up from the spring of Shiloach and brought up in great festivity and kind of ecstatic dancing and everything, and poured into these hollows, okay? That's kind of the Jewish rain dance, which is what happens actually in Sukkot, but it was this prayer for rain and for the flow of water to continue working kind of in the world. And that's part of the great holiday of Sukkot. But in this version of the story, he's digging those pipes that are going down, that are going down to the Tehom. And of course, the guy who's listening to the story says, okay, but that's not songs of ascent. I mean, that's not about an ascent. It's about the descent of the water. And now look at this beautiful addition. So he says to him, to Rav Chisda, rather, if you already remind me, I may say that it was stated thus. This is the way he got the story. When David dug the hollows beneath the site of the temple, the abyss rose and threatened to drown the world. Is there anyone, David inquired, who knows whether it is permitted to inscribe the ineffable name upon a shard and cast it into the deep so that its waves should subside? No one answered. Okay, so in this version, like in all great legends, they have many, many versions in oral tradition. But in this version, David is saying, is there anyone who knows what would make the Tehom go away? Okay, everybody's up to their noses in the water of the abyss. The world is about to be submerged, and you have to know, somebody has to find a solution. And the solution, from the point of view of how David sees it, is to take the most powerful force against the power of the abyss. And that's going to make her kind of go right down into her sinkhole and go back into the depths. And that is writing the name Yud Hey Vav Hey. Okay, it's very magical on the one hand as a story, but it's also presenting that these are two forces that are kind of are standing opposed to each other. The power of Yud Vav He and the Tehom. So David asks, is there anyone that knows if I'm allowed to write this sacred name, write it on a shard, throw it into the water, and its waters would subside? No one answered. And David said, whoever knows the answer and does not speak, may he suffocate. Whereupon Achitophel adduced an argument to himself. If, okay, you have to be doing it this way. If, for the purpose of establishing peace between a man and his wife, the Torah said, let my name that was written in sanctity be blotted out by water, how much more so may it be done in order to establish peace in the world? Okay, I don't want to go into the whole story of Sota, but what he's bringing up, Achitophel says, there is a ritual in situations of a dangerous, romantic jealousy, right? That the woman is brought to the temple and made to drink a water in which the name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh has been put into the water. This is a biblical, very famous biblical chapter, and there's a whole tractate about that in Talmud, and there's great arguments about it. But for our story, it's very clear that the man says, that Achitophel says, well, if in order to bring some kind of peace to a household, God is willing to have that sanctified name blotted out in water, okay, where it has these homeopathic parts of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh kind of in that water so that peace could be brought between a man and wife, then surely I can do that in order to bring peace to the world. He said to David, it's permitted. David then inscribed the name upon a shard, cast it into the abyss, and it subsided 16,000 cubits. When he saw that it had subsided to such great extent, he said, the nearer it is to the earth, the wetter the earth is. And he sang the 15 songs of ascent, and the deep reascended 15,000 cubits and remained 1,000 cubits below the surface. Okay. That's our story for the day, and now I want to say something about it. The story tells us something very fascinating about David, right? It tells us that what does he understand when the waters subside? What happened? What happened? Okay. The waters didn't go down to the balanced level in which they were before, but they just went all the way down. And remember that there's like a teomachia, they call it. It's like the war of the gods. There's an animosity between the God of Israel that represents order and Torah and law, and this archaic, powerful presence of the abyss. So the question is, when she kind of recedes into herself and goes back down into the deep parts of underneath the earth, what happens? And according to the story, what actually happens is that the world starts drying up. The world starts drying up. And why is it drying up? Because the abyss went too far down. And if it goes too far down, if you're coming from psychoanalysis, or if you're coming from art, or if you're coming from myth, or if you're coming from any kind of world of imagination, she's too far down, right? Everything, right? The world needs to be nourished by the waters of the deep, right? Of the abyss, the great waters that lie under the earth. But if it's seen in this personified way, it's also understanding that if you put too much, desire and too much force, right, she's going to disappear. She's going to go down, but that can be very detrimental for the world. And I think that the reason that David is such a beloved figure in these legends is that David, who's so reckless in kind of picking up that stone and just allowing the world to go into chaos, at this moment, when he understands what he's done, and he also understands that the world is now again in danger, but now it's not in danger because of too much water. Now it's in danger because of the lack of contact between the world and the abyss. And instead of reverting to what he loves to do, which is to use his power, David brings out a totally different side of his personality. And I think that's the magic of the story. And that is, he brings out music and poetry. Okay? Music and poetry. He's starting to think, what's going to make her come up again? What's going to bring her back? What's going to bring her higher so that this world, right, so that we can live, so that we can be connected to imagination, to the subconscious, to the wisdom, and what he starts doing is singing. Okay, David starts singing. And because he's a great musician, right, and he's a great poet. Look, from the point of view of attribution, I'm not meaning to say here that historically David wrote all the songs, but I'm saying this is in the imagination of the people. David is a musician. We know that from the biblical story. And he totally brings these kind of anima-drawn qualities that he has. And that's what he uses now to invite the waters to slowly, slowly, slowly come up to the level where the abyss is actually feeding and moistening the world, but is not endangering to kind of totally engulf it on the other hand. So like it's creating a new delicate balance. And by the way, it's a very interesting story also about environment. It's like, how does one create a balance? Okay, what is the balance between what is above and below? So, and then the storyteller ends it by saying, you see, that's why they call it the Songs of Ascent. The Songs of Ascent are the songs that David sang to the abyss as he was standing, kind of inviting her and invoking her to come up into the world, back into the world. So, so I want to say that this story has been very inspiring for me in my life, from the point of view of being very openly kind of engaging with this question of a desire to possess the center, and the dangers of using or abusing power in order to do that, and the questions of what are the other tools to create balance and relationship to the place. Now, if you travel in Jerusalem and you go and you stand on Mount Scopus, where I've been teaching for many, many years, and you look down into the city, right? According to tradition, that's the place where the pilgrims would come and they would tear their clothes looking at the destroyed city. But when you're looking at it today, if you're looking at it 2020, you're seeing a city. You know, it looks like just a real city. It's here, it's real. But actually, on it and beneath it are layers and layers of wars, dreams, passions, desires, fantasies of people coming from the Christian tradition, from the Jewish tradition, and from the Islamic tradition to say, we want to take hold of this place. And I think that in many ways, this story is really about how cautious and delicate the meaning of having a relationship with the center of the world must be. So it's a story about David moving from kind of violence, actually very powerful violence, right? Digging down against the decree of God, pulling up the stone, right? Doing all this. And then David standing and singing. And I find that it's very inspiring. It's an inspiring invitation to think of what are the ways that we can have a relationship to this place. And I want to end our session with a poem written by an incredible Israeli poet who died already, maybe 15 years ago, maybe even more. And his name is Amir Gilboa. Amir Gilboa came from the Ukraine. He came here in the early 30s. He came to Israel, Palestine. And during the Holocaust, all of his family, everybody was murdered. And he was a very unique poet with a very unique kind of stance also. He didn't belong to all the cliques. He's a very beloved poet in Israel. And he wrote a poem about Jerusalem called Liyerushalayim Iri, to my city, Jerusalem. And I want to give it as a gift here because Amir Gilboa never lived in Jerusalem. But I think that as a Jew, Jerusalem is his city. Jerusalem is your city. Jerusalem is his city in some kind of special way. And he wrote the following beautiful, beautiful words. Okay. To Jerusalem, my city, I wanted to say out loud words that I whisper to her heart, so that my ears may also hear that which to her my heart murmurs. Maybe I'll read it again. To Jerusalem, my city, I wanted to say out loud words that I whisper to her heart, so that my ears may also hear that which to her my heart murmurs. And I thought it would be good for your virtual trip to take a moment and feel what are the words that you're whispering in your heart to Jerusalem. Okay, whatever Jerusalem is for you, what is your heart murmuring for Jerusalem? If you like using the chat, you can just put it in the chat. It's just so beautiful that Amir Gilboa could say, I'm trying to do that. I want to say out loud all those things that I feel that are so painful and so loving and so alienated and so connected. So let's just take a minute, everybody. Okay, Amir Gilboa, right? We're talking about Amir Gilboa and his poem. And you can write or just write for yourself. Some murmurs of your heart. I wish we could just open the microphones now and just everybody can pour in all their murmurs. But I think there is something beautiful also about the things that you're just putting here in this technology that we're using for it. And I do want to bless you all that you continue having a fascinating trip in Israel, and maybe one day I'll meet you really in person, in 3D, in a real city. And be well and have a good year. And shalom. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a great way for everyone here to come to Jerusalem. Usually we take the bus and we go to an overlook, as you had mentioned, usually maybe Mount Scopus or a different overlook, and look into the old city before we make our way in there. So you have done that for us in teaching. And this afternoon at 12:30 our time and 3:30 p.m. we actually are going to go into the old city, but to a part most people don't go explore. We're going to go into the Arab East Jerusalem with David Mendelsohn. On Sunday, we go to the Christian Quarter. This trip is not meant to show you things you know already. It's meant to challenge you all. And I appreciate everybody that's joined us. And I appreciate it. Only took about 10 to 12 years to get Melila Hellner to teach CSP. So this whole trip was worth just having the ability to invite you and have you with us online. So we do hope that we can learn with you in Israel, and if not, and maybe here as well. I know you come to teach in the area in California. So thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Kogod. Remember, we are all hoping to go to, I see Rabbi Spitz is here too. We're hoping to go to Israel next October, and we have two great trips that kind of dovetail with each other. And they have different focus points, but the general agreement that Israel is a fascinating place. And if you want to get to understand Israel and the Jewish people and your Judaism and your spirituality, there's no better place to go in the world. I mean, New York maybe has great food, I understand that, but nothing like Israel. So thank you for the teaching. We look forward to studying with you again. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you. See you very soon. Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye.
See you soon. Water break. You're ready to go put on your comfortable walking slippers. We're going soon. Bye, guys. Bye-bye, Melila. Nice to meet you again.
Bye.
Bye.